Okay, so get this. Kenyan teenagers are using TikTok to make money, but not how you might think.
Yeah.
This isn't about like dance challenges or, going viral or anything like that.
Right.
It's a lot more complex, and honestly, it's pretty troubling.
Yeah.
And it's got the Kenyan government like really going after TikTok.
Hmm.
So we're diving into this YouTube video from First Post Africa,
Okay.
and it really breaks down like Kenya's crackdown on TikTok.
You just.
And you are going to want to hear this.
Okay, I'm ready.
It brings up some really, really tough questions about content moderation and, child exploitation and like how we even begin to regulate these huge global online platforms.
Yeah.
So let's get into it.
Okay.
What is going on in Kenya?
Well, it all started with this BBC investigation.
Okay.
And they found something really shocking.
What's that?
Kenyan teenagers, some as young as 15, were using TikTok for sexual live streams. And the part that really sparked outrage was that TikTok is allegedly taking a 70% cut of the profits from these streams.
70%?
That's a lot.
That's a huge chunk. But I thought TikTok like officially banned that kind of content.
They do.
Okay.
And that's where the real problem is.
Okay.
The BBC report actually had statements from TikTok moderators saying that the company knew these exploitative live streams were happening.
Wow.
So they have these strict policies,
Right.
But it seems like they're profiting from content that goes against those policies.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
That's a really tough position for them to be in, and I can see why people are so upset about it.
Yeah, definitely.
But what I don't get is how a law written in like 1962 can even apply to something like TikTok.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Films and Stage Plays Act of 1962 was made way before the internet even existed.
Right.
But the Kenyan government is saying it can apply to live-streamed content. Basically, they're treating those live streams like performances that need to be regulated.
So they're saying that even though the technology is new, the exploitation is still exploitation.
Exactly.
Whether it's on a stage or on a screen.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's not just that one law.
Okay.
Kenya's Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018 and the Data Protection Act of 2019 also come into play.
I see.
Those laws provide a more modern framework for addressing online child exploitation and data privacy concerns.
Okay, so it sounds like Kenya is trying to use its laws to tackle this really complex digital issue.
Right.
But what are the consequences if TikTok is found in violation?
Yeah.
Could they actually get banned in Kenya?
The potential sanctions are pretty serious.
Yeah, okay.
It could be anything from huge fines to them having to stop operating completely.
Wow.
And yeah, even complete ban is possible.
So they could get kicked out of Kenya.
Yeah, and it's not a small market for them.
Right.
TikTok has over 1 billion users globally, and it's the third most popular platform in Kenya.
Losing access to that many users would be a huge blow for them.
Yeah, it would.
But this isn't the first time TikTok has faced these kinds of problems in Kenya, is it?
It's not.
Didn't they try to address these concerns before?
They did.
Okay.
They met with President Ruto.
Okay.
And the CEO said they would monitor content really closely. They even said they would open an office in Kenya and hire more Kenyans to work for the platform.
Wow.
But it seems like it hasn't been enough.
So why are these efforts failing? Is this just a problem in Kenya, or is this a global thing for TikTok?
It's definitely not just Kenya.
Okay.
TikTok is being watched all over the world, and there are a lot of different concerns.
Okay, so let's break down this global scrutiny a little bit.
Okay.
What are the main issues that keep coming up?
Well, in the U.S., there are allegations of espionage.
Espionage? Wow.
Yeah, with concerns that the Chinese government could be accessing user data through the app. The EU is looking into claims that TikTok was used by Russia to spread disinformation during elections in Romania.
Oh, wow.
And then you have countries like Canada, the UK, and Australia, which have all banned TikTok on government devices.
I see. And then there's India and Somalia.
Right.
They've both completely banned TikTok.
Yeah.
It seems like every country has a problem with this app.
Pretty much. And these concerns, although they're often presented separately, actually connect in interesting ways.
How so?
Well, for example, the bans on government devices in those Western countries are mostly driven by security concerns.
Okay.
But they also reflect a wider worry about TikTok being used for political manipulation.
Or for spreading harmful content.
Exactly.
So it's not just about data privacy or child exploitation. It's about whether TikTok can be used to spread propaganda or influence elections.
Yeah, this is getting pretty serious.
Ew.
And it makes you wonder, is all this scrutiny really justified?
Yeah.
Is TikTok really that different from other social media platforms, or are they being unfairly targeted?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about something else.
What's that?
It seems like the U.S. is focused on those espionage allegations.
Yeah.
But the EU seems more worried about TikTok's role in, like, election interference. Why do you think those concerns are so different?
Well, that difference really highlights this geopolitical tensions going on.
Okay.
The U.S. is in this rivalry with China, so their worries about TikTok are naturally shaped by that.
Right.
The EU, on the other hand, has been dealing with Russian disinformation campaigns for years.
Okay.
So their anxieties come from that experience.
It's like everyone is looking at TikTok based on their own national interests and fears.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if any platform, no matter where it comes from, can truly operate on a global scale without getting caught up in all of this.
Yeah, without getting caught in these geopolitical webs.
Exactly.
It's really interesting to think about.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really complicated situation for sure.
Yeah, it is.
But let's get back to Kenya for a second.
Okay.
I'm curious about how these laws could actually be used against TikTok.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've talked about the laws.
Right.
But what would enforcement actually look like?
Well, if you look at the Films and Stage Plays Act,
Okay.
it gives the Kenyan government a lot of power to censor or restrict content they think is harmful or offensive.
So they could use that to make TikTok remove specific accounts or even like whole categories of content?
Potentially, yeah.
Wow.
And the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act gives them the authority to actually prosecute individuals or companies that are involved in sharing illegal content online.
So TikTok could be held responsible for what its users do, even if they didn't create the content themselves.
That seems to be the argument the Kenyan government is making.
Okay.
They're basically saying that TikTok has to stop its platform from being used for illegal activities.
Right.
And if they don't, they'll be held accountable.
That brings up a whole other question.
Yeah.
How far does a company's responsibility actually go?
Right.
I mean, can they really be expected to police every single thing that gets uploaded by their users?
It's a tough balance to strike.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have freedom of expression.
Right.
And these platforms need to encourage creativity and open discussion.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have the very real dangers of child exploitation,
Yeah.
hate speech, and the spread of misinformation.
And it's not like there's an easy fix for this.
No.
Even if TikTok hires a ton of moderators, they're still going to miss stuff.
Yeah, it's like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon.
It really is.
And it gets even harder when you think about the cultural differences around the world.
Okay.
And the different legal standards in different countries.
Right.
What might be okay in one country could be completely unacceptable in another.
So how does a global platform like TikTok even begin to deal with those differences?
Right.
Do they have to have different rules for every country they operate in?
It's something they're trying to figure out right now. And there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
Some people say they need to take a more localized approach.
Okay.
Tailoring their content moderation policies to the specific laws and cultural norms of each place.
Right.
Others say that would be too messy and impossible to manage.
Like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly.
If they try to please everyone, they'll end up pleasing no one.
Right.
But if they have a one-size-fits-all approach, they risk alienating entire countries.
Yeah, and all of this is happening at the same time as these huge geopolitical tensions.
Right.
It's not a coincidence that the U.S. is focusing on the espionage allegations, while the EU is worried about election interference.
It's almost like TikTok has become this battleground for these bigger conflicts.
In a way, it has.
Wow.
And that makes finding a solution even harder.
Right.
Because it's not just about protecting users or preventing harm. It's about navigating complex power dynamics and competing national interests.
That's a lot bigger than just TikTok.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal challenges. Yeah.
The content moderation problem and the geopolitical context.
Right.
But what does all of this mean for the average person who uses TikTok?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that we can't just sit back and passively use these platforms.
Okay.
We have to be aware of the risks.
Right.
We need to think critically about what we're seeing and hold these companies responsible for what they do.
It's funny, we started this deep dive talking about Kenyan teenagers making money on TikTok.
I know, right?
And now we're talking about espionage and election interference and global power struggles.
It's crazy how quickly things change.
It really shows how deeply connected these platforms are to our lives.
Yeah.
And how their impact goes far beyond just entertainment or connecting with friends.
They're not just apps on our phones anymore. They're shaping political discussions, influencing public opinion, even playing a role in international relations.
And that's why it's so important to talk about these things.
Yeah, because what happens with these platforms won't just be decided by governments and tech companies.
Right.
It's something we all have a say in.
Absolutely.
But with all this talk about the dangers and the problems, is there another side to this story?
I'm glad you asked that, because while it's important to be aware of the risks, it's also important to acknowledge the good things about platforms like TikTok.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, they've given anyone the ability to create content.
Right.
Anyone with a smartphone can make and share videos with the entire world.
That's true.
That was unimaginable a few years ago.
Yeah, you're right.
TikTok has given a voice to people who might not have had one before.
I agree.
And it's created spaces for communities to form around shared interests.
Right.
No matter how niche those interests might be.
You're right. And let's not forget about the money-making opportunities.
Oh, definitely.
For a lot of creators, especially in developing countries, TikTok has become a real way to make a living.
It's true.
It lets them use their skills and reach a global audience.
Exactly.
So it's not all bad news.
No.
These platforms can be good as well as bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But to make the most of the good stuff,
Yeah.
we have to be informed and engaged users.
Right.
We need to think critically about what we see.
Yeah.
Be aware of how algorithms are controlling what we see in our feeds. And speak up when we see something wrong.
So it's about finding that sweet spot,
Yeah.
enjoying the good parts of these platforms, while also being aware of the risks and trying to minimize them.
Exactly. And that's a challenge we all face as we navigate this increasingly complex digital world.
Yeah, well said. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
It has.
But before we wrap up, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned before about algorithms.
Okay, what about them?
You said we need to be aware of how algorithms are shaping what we see in our feeds.
Right.
But I'm not sure everyone really understands how algorithms work or how much they impact our experience online.
That's a good point. Algorithms are basically sets of rules that decide what content we see on these platforms.
Okay.
They're designed to keep us hooked by showing us more of what they think we like.
So it's not just about who we follow or what our friends post.
Right.
These algorithms are making choices for us, choosing what we see based on what we've done and liked in the past.
That's right. And that can be both good and bad.
You got. So
on one hand, it can help us find new stuff we might enjoy.
I see.
But on the other hand, it can create echo chambers.
Yeah.
Where we're only exposed to information that reinforces what we already believe.
Which can lead to polarization and misinformation.
And even radicalization.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It is, and it's something we have to be aware of because these algorithms are always changing.
Right.
And their impact on our lives is only going to get bigger in the future.
So if we want to be smart about using these platforms, we have to understand how these algorithms work and how they're shaping what we see online.
Absolutely. And we need to demand more transparency from these companies. We need to know what data they're collecting, how they're using it, and what they're doing to lessen the potential harm of these algorithms.
It's about taking back control of our online experience.
It really is.
Yeah, it feels like we're talking about like a whole new level of digital literacy now.
It really is.
It's not just about, knowing how to use the apps. Right. It's about understanding like the bigger forces behind the scenes.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point for our listener to remember.
Yeah.
The case of TikTok in Kenya is really about so much more than just one app.
Right.
Or one country. It's kind of a perfect example of the challenges we're all facing in this increasingly digital world.
Yeah, it shows how these platforms are like woven into our lives in ways we don't even realize.
Right.
From how we get information to how we connect with each other. These platforms are shaping our experiences, and we have to be informed and engaged participants in that process.
I completely agree. And remember, this isn't just about TikTok. It's about any platform that uses algorithms to decide what we see.
Okay.
Whether it's social media news aggregators or even shopping sites.
Yeah.
These algorithms are everywhere.
So what can we do about it? It feels like we're going up against these huge tech companies with all their power and resources.
Yeah, the first step is just being aware.
Okay.
The more we know how these algorithms work, the better we can navigate them.
Right.
We can start by paying attention to the content that we're seeing.
Okay.
And asking ourselves why we're seeing it and looking for different viewpoints.
It's like being a smarter consumer.
Yeah.
Not just of products, but of information.
Exactly. And we can also support organizations that are working to hold these companies accountable.
Okay.
Pushing for more transparency and ethical use of algorithms.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that we're not powerless.
Right.
As users, we have a voice, and we can use it to demand change.
Absolutely.
Whether it's through our choices, our activism, or our conversations, we can make a difference.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what this deep dive is all about.
Okay.
Empowering you, the listener, to navigate this complex world.
With knowledge.
And a critical eye.
So as you're scrolling through your favorite app today, just take a second to think about those algorithms working in the background.
Right.
Ask yourself what you're seeing and why.
Yeah.
And remember that you have the power to shape your online experience.
Stay curious.
Yeah.
Stay engaged. And keep asking those tough questions.
Thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure.